chair. You'll see what a tremendous artist I am in a moment. We have a chair that has just one leg. It's going to fall over pretty quickly, probably unpredictably which direction, round. Two, it'll fall in one plane or the other. Well, as I said, I'm not a good artist, but we add the third one, we get a tripod, like a piano stool. Each one will reinforce the other to give you a stable surface. I apologize for the bad art here, but like this. It will sit there. Well, there we have one, as you can see, right here. It's not amazingly stable. Any one of you can stand on it and it would not tip over. Remove one leg and it loses its stability. And those three legs are the ideas of individual rights, or as it's known, legal literature associated with liberalism, imprescriptible individual rights. That is to say, imprescriptible means they're not prescribed, they're not grants, they're not gifts from authority. There's something you have in virtue of being a human being. And liberals and various philosophers have debated what that means. Are they God-given? Are they because you're created in God's image? Is it because of the human being's rational nature? And so on and so forth. But something about us commands the respect of others. Something about each one of you demands my respect. That I cannot use you as an object. I couldn't butcher you and eat you. Shocked by that, but of course that's not so uncommon in much of human history. I couldn't enslave you. I can't put chains on you and force you to wash the dishes that are currently sitting in my sink, unwashed, making me feel guilty. I can't do that. Why? You say, because you have rights. You have the right to expect a certain kind of treatment from me, as I have from you. This comes out of a tradition of thinking, much of it rooted in the so-called Spanish scholastics, who talked about the concept of dominium. And dominium is a very interesting term. It can be translated a variety of ways. It comes from domus, means a house. It doesn't mean you're very house-like. But a dominus is the master of the house. In Roman law, the dominus was the one who had responsibility for the household. Much as today, if a very small child came over and kicked me, I would probably be censured by all of you if I were to kick the child back, slap him to the ground. I would go to the parents and say, your child has kicked me. Because the parents are responsible for the behavior of the child. Under a traditional patriarchal Roman household, the pater familias had responsibility for all of the members, even though we would consider them adults. He was the one who held responsibility for them. So he was the dominus. The dominus is the one who has dominium. Dominium means, in this context, responsibility. There's a great debate that emerges among these scholastic thinkers about the nature of dominion. And I'll just mention very superficially a few important names. Thomas Aquinas, the early first scholastics, wrote a very important book, which is underappreciated today. It's called On the Unity of the Intellect Against the Averroists. It's a very interesting, relevant book. You can learn a lot from this book. And it's relevant to contemporary debates about communitarianism and social philosophy generally. There was an argument among different philosophers about the interpretation of Aristotle's book De Anima, On the Soul. And it had to do with a translation of a Greek term and whether there was one material intellect. Basic Aristotelian idea of the soul is here is a flower. In a sense, here's my material intellect, like some kind of wax, and the form of the flower is impressed on the material intellect by the agent intellect. So that's his kind of psychology, if you will. And there was a discussion whether the material intellect for all of mankind was one material intellect. Which would be a nice way of explaining how we can all know the same thing. You can know the Pythagorean theorem, and I know the Pythagorean theorem. It's impressed in the same material intellect, and we can share in the same idea. There's a group of people following Ibn Rushd of Airways. He is known Latin, a great Islamic philosopher, student of Aristotle from Spain, who interpreted this to mean one material intellect. most important name, Cedra of Brabant, a Christian philosopher. Aristotle considered this, St. Thomas considered a terrible idea. And you can see why from the Christian perspective, also from the theological perspective. Because some people said, whoa, if there's one material intellect for all of mankind, that means we all have the same soul. If Peter was saved, I'm saved too. So I can spend all of my time drinking and gambling and sinning, and I still get saved. This, of course, is unacceptable from the Orthodox theological perspective. And Thomas attacks it, and he says, no, that the material intellect is individuated, one for each. And he gets an interesting, really rich epistemological argument for how you and I can know the same thing without having the same soul. It's a very interesting argument. But he argues for what we would call kind of individualism. You are a unique person with your own intellect. That forms a foundation for scholastic thinking about individuality. And it comes to the fore in the debate over the Indians. When the Spanish come to the New World, they meet these interesting creatures. They're featherless, they have 2 legs, they're featherless bipeds, if you will. They look astonishingly like human beings, but they can't talk. You try to talk to them and they just give you a lot of jibber jabber. No Spanish. Are they people? Now this may strike us as a really strange question, but in fact it recurs repeatedly when culturally very different groups come in contact or conflict with each other. The question is, what are they? Should we treat them like we treat each other? Juan Gines de Sepulveda argued they are natural slaves. God so loved the Spaniards, and God is just really good to us Spaniards, he created an entire continent full of servants for us. And we would be failing in our responsibilities if we did not complete their natures by giving them commands, because otherwise they just sit around. They don't know what to do. They need us, really. So we shall enslave them. God put them there for us, and we are fulfilling and completing their nature by providing the ends which they lack. Bartolomé de las Casas and Francisco de Vitoria attacked this really sharply. De Vitoria, in his book on the Indians, which is a very brilliant book, and he focuses on this question of dominion. They have dominion. They are responsible for their actions. If an Indian were to attack you, you would hold them accountable as another human being. And as such, we must recognize his moral agency. Bartolomé de las Casas, in a great debate in 1550 with Juan Gines de Sepulveda, which he effectively won intellectually, and converted the intellectual elite of the church and the kingdom to his side, which is not to say that the Indians were more protected, or I should say, not fully protected, but more than before, because the church stood with them. He made an interesting point to the church. He said, do you want them to come to church? I said, yes. Then they're humans. Because you don't let animals come into church and take communion. And the church fathers really thought about it. It's a good point. But these people developed the idea that the Indians have rights. The conclusion of de las Casas' book is very beautiful and very moving. He dedicated his whole life to the defense of the Indians. When he was bishop in Hispaniola, he refused last rites to any slaveholders. It's a very powerful sanction for any Roman Catholics here. You know what that is. It means that they die with their sins on their heads. It's a tremendous punishment of the church. And one of his students, Francisco Marroquin, who was bishop of Chiapas, southern Mexico, Guatemala, did the same thing. It's not an accident the largest indigenous populations in Central America are there, because the church defended them against the more predatory behavior of the Spaniards. So this idea is individuals have rights. You have your right, your life to lead, and I have a life to lead, you have a life to lead. But what is the natural response to that on the part of the advocates of absolutism? It'd be chaos. Oh my God.